Hello, I am Lily Cass, Opera Philadelphia Scholar in Residence, and it is my pleasure today to introduce you to The Raven, a performance that will take place at the Miller Theater. The experience includes a full performance of Toshio Hasakawa's monodrama, The Raven, as well as an interactive audience experience. I will first give you some context for the monodrama itself, and then I will explain what you can expect out of the performance as a whole. In The Raven, Hasakawa set the full text of Edgar Allan Poe's well-known elegy, also called The Raven. Edgar Allan Poe was an American writer of short stories and poetry. Born in Boston, but raised in Richmond by foster parents after his mother's untimely death, Poe pursued his literary career across the East Coast and spent some of his most productive years here in Philadelphia. You may very well have walked by his house, preserved as a National Historic Site at 532 North 7th Street. Poe is associated with the genre of Gothic fiction, which often includes dark castles, stormy nights, and unknown or unknowable forces at work. In fact, The Raven is sometimes recited at Halloween performances because of its spooky atmosphere. Poe's own life was filled with tragedy. While writing The Raven in 1845, Poe's young wife, Virginia, was dying of tuberculosis, which may have influenced the poem's melancholy tone. On the surface, The Raven is about a scholar who is working in his study when he hears a persistent tapping at the door. He opens the door and sees nothing, then opens the window and a raven flies in. He thinks he hears the raven speak a few words, and he tries to make the raven explain his presence. The raven does not provide any answers, but takes up permanent residence in the scholar's study. I told you it was spooky. If you look past the surface of the poem, you will notice that some of the scholar's persistent thoughts seem to be about the loss of a woman named Lenore. Is Lenore dead? Is she just lost to the scholar? Even if that is unclear, he definitely is mourning for her, and he thinks that the raven speaks her name. Is the raven itself Lenore? Is the raven a representation of grief? All of this is open to interpretation. In terms of structure, the poem has 18 stanzas, and every line has the same pattern of stressed syllables followed by unstressed syllables. So once upon a midnight dreary. This poetic meter propels the poem forward methodically. There is also a lot of repetition in the poem, which at times feels somewhat claustrophobic. We are stuck inside the scholar's head with the same thoughts echoing endlessly. If we look closely at the language in the poem, we will recognize that a lot of the descriptions in the poem are of sounds. There is a persistent tapping, also referred to as rapping, on the scholar's chamber door, which is what turns out to be the raven. There are also echoes, shrieks, rustling, muttering, croaking, and tinkling. It is perhaps not surprising, with all this noise in the poem, that Hasakawa would be drawn to set the raven to music. Toshio Hasakawa is a highly regarded Japanese composer. Hasakawa was born in 1955 in Hiroshima, and at the age of 21, he moved to Germany to study composition. Hasakawa currently splits his time in between Germany and Japan. His influences include Zen Buddhism, Noh theater, Japanese history, Shakespeare, and Mozart, and his music often includes traditional Japanese instruments alongside Western orchestral instruments. The Raven premiered in Brussels in 2012 and has been performed many times since all over the world. The monodrama The Raven is scored for one voice, a single mezzo-soprano, alongside an interesting instrumental ensemble that includes several woodwinds, both common, such as piccolo, flute, clarinet, alto, and tenor saxophones, and unusual, like an alto flute, a bass flute, and a bass clarinet. It also includes a trumpet, a trombone, a piano, and a whole suite of percussion, including vibraphone, triangle, bass drum, 4 bongos, a tam-tam, a whip, timpani holding Buddhistic metal bowls, furin, which are Japanese wind chimes, and antique cymbals. The voice in this piece is also not something you would necessarily expect from an operatic monodrama. The mezzo-soprano Kristen Choi in our performance is asked to modulate her voice between speaking, whispering, and what is called Sprechgesang, or speak singing, an eerie in-between technique of speaking with pitch. The result of all of this is an atmospheric sound world in which the mezzo-soprano's voice sometimes competes and sometimes dominates the complex and ever-changing orchestral environment. Hosokawa, asked about his take on the poem, explained, "I read The Raven by Edgar Allan Poe. It reminded me of the Japanese No play. A view of the world in No is not anthropocentric. Some of the main characters in the No are animals and plants, and some are unearthly spirits. Poe describes the process of the collapse of the modern rational world as consequence of an invasion of the world by a weird animal raven, which lives in the other world." The raven isn't given a singing voice in the work. The only voice is that of the mezzo-soprano, who stands in for the scholar who narrates the original poem. However, the orchestra provides a collective voice for the singer's environment, including the raven. The instruments are manipulated to imitate the wind, the tapping at the door, and the turmoil inside the mind of the singer. Even just listening to an audio recording of the piece, you cannot help being immersed in the environment. Opera Philadelphia's performance of Hosokawa's The Raven enhances the immersive experience even beyond the work itself. Director Arya Umezawa, who describes herself as an artist innovator, is collaborating with Philadelphia's own Obvious Agency, a creative theater company that specializes in crafting interactive works. Picking up on the major themes in The Raven of grief and loss, the portion of the performance preceding Hosokawa's monodrama introduces the audience to the character who is glaringly missing from The Raven, Lenore. Described only as the rare and radiant maiden whom the angels name Lenore, nameless here forevermore, and the lost Lenore in the poem, the audience never knows any features of Lenore's character or her relationship with the scholar. The Obvious Agency has devised an experience in which audience members can learn about Lenore through interacting with a version of that character. Different groups of the audience will be guided by a different Lenore through the first portion of the performance, so that when you arrive in your seats, ready to hear Hosokawa's music, you will each have had a unique version of what has been lost, what the mezzo-soprano is mourning, and who the raven could be. I hope that you will enjoy the experience of being given more agency in your interaction with an operatic work, as Opera Philadelphia and its collaborators give you the opportunity to grow beyond the role of a passive audience member and to fully engage as an individual and a member of our community. Thank you for being with us with this lecture here at the Kimmel Center, which, as you may be able to hear in the background, is currently under construction. So thank you for bearing with us with the noise.